around later, but I'm delighted to be joined on the platform with our two very distinguished guests. His Excellency Wamkele Mene, who most of you will know is the Secretary General of the AfCFTA, Secretariat. Wamkele, you're very welcome here this morning. Thank you for taking the time. And also Professor Benedict Oramah, President and Chairman of the Board of Directors at Afreximbank, who obviously are one of the major impactful financial Pan-African institutions. So what I thought I would do, just to start with, is to give both of our panellists an opportunity to just set out where their particular organisation is at the moment and what the priorities are. Secretary General, would you like to just tell us where the AfCFTA has got to and what your priorities are for the next period?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us to participate here this morning.
Thank you so much.
As you may be aware, the AfCFTA was established in the middle of the pandemic.
Okay, so you'll turn it on at the
We
right
now
time.
have 43 countries that have ratified the agreement. That is to say, 43 countries have accepted the obligations to reduce, eliminate barriers to trade and investment in Africa. The market in Africa has been fragmented for decades now, and so the objective is to consolidate this market of 1.3 billion people with a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion to make it competitive, industrial, and of course to create jobs and opportunities for investors. Our priorities are first private sector engagement. That's why I am here today. We want to invite the private sector to invest in value chains that create jobs, that drive industrialization in Africa, and of course that enhance innovation. The value chains that we have identified are the automotive sector, agriculture and agro-processing, transport and logistics, as well as the pharmaceutical sector. If you take, for example, the pharmaceutical sector and looking at where are the opportunities for investment for the private sector to invest, in 2019, Africa imported $16 billion worth of pharmaceuticals from around the world. That $16 billion is, as I said yesterday, jobs that are exported, innovation that is exported, competitiveness that is exported. So we want to create opportunities in the pharmaceutical sector for investors, for job creation, and of course to service public health needs of Africa. The other area of priority is the trade corridors, which the government of the UK, we are working with the support of the government of the UK, we are working to improve competitiveness of trade corridors, so that if you are Unilever or Diageo or any other UK company that does business in Africa, when your goods transit, they can do so efficiently with minimal disruption in terms of customs procedures, and to, of course, improve the competitiveness of the trade corridors. So these are the two priorities for us for this year in the immediate future as we implement the AfCFTA. You will imagine, of course, that it is not easy, that it is difficult to integrate a market with such pronounced differentials in levels of economic development, in export capacity. It is not an easy task, but we know that it is possible to integrate our market for our continent to one day become as globally competitive as any other part of the world. We know that from the experience of the European Union. 72 years down the line, from when the European Union embarked on the integration project, we see the results. We see that countries in Eastern Europe in particular, where people, after they joined the European Union, people's income doubled. GDP per capita doubled as a result of the single market that they joined. So we want to be as competitive as any other part of the world, and we're looking at leveraging on private sector investment to be able to do that.
Thank you. Before I ask the Professor to comment, can I just pick up on one point you made? You mentioned there were still, I think, 11 or 12 countries that are still to ratify. Is that, how should I put this politely, is that bureaucracy or is that resistance to the principle? Because obviously the whole driving force behind it is to have a Pan-African free trade agreement.
Countries are at different levels of readiness. Even countries that have ratified politically and legally, they are committed to market integration. But of course, there are technical details to be worked out. For example, rules of origin is a very, very contentious issue. So countries are taking time to deliberate internally on the impact of the trade agreement on their domestic economy. And I think that's to be expected, because the AfCFTA is about countries undertaking far-reaching reforms, economic reforms, that have a direct impact on job creation, on industrialization, as I've mentioned, and on competitiveness. And so I expect that, countries will take time to consider the impact of the AfCFTA on their domestic economy. So the 12 countries that have not yet ratified are not politically opposed or legally opposed, but they have to satisfy their domestic requirements for entering into an international agreement of this nature, which, as I said, has far-reaching economic implications.
Thank you. Professor, in your tenure of the leadership of Afreximbank, you and your senior team have really been, how shall I put this, in the fast lane and really driving Afreximbank into all sorts of areas that perhaps 10, 15 years ago you weren't involved with. And I think it would be just helpful for you to set out for everybody today what the priorities of Afreximbank are now. Obviously, whilst focusing and remaining on the core trade finance that Afreximbank was set up for, but also moving into all sorts of other additional areas for the benefit of the whole continent.
No, thank you very much, and let me also thank you and also the team at Invest Africa for the opportunity to be here. Thanks to my brother, Wamkele, for the great job he's doing to help us implement the project, which is really the last chance we have on the continent to become respected again in the world. Let me take the journey back to when we started what we call created the Africa generation, the new Africa as we know it. In 1963, leaders of independent African states gathered to form the Organization of African Unity. That was done in a summit in Addis Ababa in May 22 to 23, 1963. At that meeting, they took a number of decisions, some political, some economic. So the key economic decisions they took, what they put as priorities for them, that first meeting were about three things. One, they wanted to form a free trade area. It tells you they knew that the political independence was just a journey, that there was no way that an atomistic 55 countries, some of them not able to actually deal with their issues, can be sustainable. They knew that it was an integrated Africa that would make the difference. The second thing they said they would do was that as they did this, that they needed to begin to bring down the barriers by launching African trade fairs. So they put it as a second priority. they thought, they said they would do African trade fairs and also support transit systems, efficient transit systems. And the third was they said they would prioritize the formation of what they called an African Payment and Settlement Union. That was in 1963. So it took 30 years in 1993 for Dr. Babakar Ndiaye, president of African Development Bank, and others to fight very hard to form African Export-Import Bank. Many people do not know why the mandate of African Export-Import Bank is so broad, because you said trade finance. It's always a mistake. We're an Exim Bank. An Exim Bank is trade, but trade with special features. It's normally export credit agencies will operate. We are an economy that exports capital. Because if you are exporting commodities, there's no need for an Exim Bank because there's no need for credit. So the first line of the object of the Afreximbank is to facilitate, promote, finance intra and extra-African trade. And within those objects, you go into detail. It empowered the Afreximbank to implement a payment system. And of course, gave it a broad mandate that enable it do capital goods, enable it finance trade enabling infrastructure, enable it do equities. So it has broad mandate. So after 50 years, 55 years of that dream in 1963, we didn't think we should wait another 60 years to begin to change things. So we thought the bank had come of age. There's a saying in where I come from the southeastern part of Nigeria, that if you are young and you start asking questions about what killed your father will kill you. If you become of age and you do not ask questions about what killed your father will kill you. So we didn't want to begin to move, and I say this because I joined Afreximbank from day one, because we needed to build the confidence, understand the system, build partnerships. But after 50 years of the dream, 55 years, after a bank that has done about 25 years, it was time to make that plunge. It fell upon us to do it. And that is why we have supported him. He mentioned certain things. And he always says that Afreximbank and AfCFTA is like a twin. Afreximbank was set up for that day when this institution will be created. He said certain things. How would you, we talked about for creating efficiency for the private sector. How can you be efficient if you need to take your sample to the Middle East or Europe for testing to be able to export to another country? Mm-hmm. How can you be efficient when the standard for a good in Nigeria is different from the standard from a good in Cote d'Ivoire? How can you be efficient when, if you want to make a payment from one country to the other, you route it through around the world? And so I just wanted to land there. So that is why we had come. We use a combination of instruments. We use grants. We've already harmonized 155 standards. We follow. As they do things, for example, we're supporting the negotiations. And as things are done, the problems are identified, we go to solve them. That is the partnership we have.
Yeah, so Professor, I want to come in a moment to the relationship between your two organisations, but can I just ask you to explain in a little bit more detail the third pillar that you were talking about that dates back to '63, which is the payment and settlement system across the continent? Because obviously that could have, if and when completed, particularly if it can interrelate with the different currencies that exist, an enormous positive impact on intra-African trade. Where have you got to with that?
Okay, the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System is a project that we're implementing in partnership with the AfCFTA Secretariat and the African Union, intended to deal with the payment issues. You have about 42 currencies on the continent. So that creates problems. So what that payment system does is that it has domesticated all intra-African trade transactions. So if I'm in Egypt, I want to pay for any goods in any part of Africa, technically I pay it in Egyptian pound, so to say. The whoever is supplying it gets paid in whatever currency. Where we are today is that it has been launched. The commercial launch happened a few months ago. The pilot had been completed in the West African Monetary Zone. We have 8 central banks that have signed on. We have about almost 50 commercial banks that have signed on. We have 6 switches that have signed on. We have another 5 central banks, including one that is in a group, that has a group of countries that is in the second phase to sign on. So we expect that by the end of this year, we would have covered, from the point of view of share of trade, we would have covered more than 60% of intra-African trade. So that is where we are, and we believe that it will eventually be a game changer. Today, it costs the continent $5 billion to make intra-regional payments. That will be saved. It takes about 1 week to 2 weeks to make intra-regional payment. The pilot we did, it was taking 2 seconds to make those.
Excellent, very good. You can see the impact and the enthusiasm that there is in the room for that to come to fruition. Now, both of your organisations have signed a memorandum of understanding recently to facilitate working more closely together to impact free trade across the continent. I think it'd be helpful if we could just sort of unpack that in a little bit more detail. Wamkele, do you want to sort of just articulate why you've done it and why you think Afreximbank can help you drive your agenda?
Well, as the President said, you will have limits if you eliminate barriers to trade and investment, and you don't have trade finance. You will have limits to your success. Similarly, if you have trade finance, but the regulatory barriers to investment, to trade, if those barriers remain, you have limited successes rather. And so the relationship between Afreximbank and the AfCFTA Secretariat is mutually reinforcing the objectives and mandate of each organization. It's very important that as we reduce and eliminate these barriers to trade and investment, that the trade finance is there, for example, for small medium enterprises. The payments challenge is overcome because we, as the President said, $5 billion is what we can quantify in terms of losses to Africa's economy as a result of this challenge of payments. That's what we know. What we don't know, what we cannot quantify, is the cost to efficiency of small medium enterprises of the private sector in Africa as a result of this challenge of payments. And so there's a direct correlation, in our view, between boosting intra-Africa trade, inclusivity of people who are able to trade in Africa, and payments. And so this is one of the priorities that we have identified in the agreement that we signed, to work together to implement an efficient payment system to boost intra-Africa trade. Second, we are also working together in the establishment of the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund, which is intended to help countries who will lose revenue as a result of reducing or eliminating tariffs. Afreximbank has been identified is a fund manager for the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund. It's not going to be for the Minister of Finance to say thank you very much. I will go to the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund for budget support. It is intended for productive sector investment, retraining and reskilling of workers, investing in capitalization of equipment where you have a factory for textiles and clothing. Very, very practical interventions that the fund will make, and it will be managed by Afreximbank. The other area, which is equally important, that we collaborate on, which is covered by the agreement that we signed, is facilitating trade amongst different regions, between different regions of the continent, through the trade fair that was hosted in South Africa last November. So these are really the practical interventions to boost intra-Africa trade, to boost intra-Africa investment, that are covered by the agreement that we signed a few weeks ago in Cairo. I should say, however, that it is a formality really, because we started working together long before the agreement was signed. But what it does do is to provide a legal anchor for the relationship, which I've just described as mutually reinforcing in terms of our individual mandates.
Thank you. Professor, is there anything you'd like to add to that in terms of the drivers behind Afreximbank's enthusiasm for the MOU signed in Cairo a few weeks ago, and what you see as the sort of medium to long-term vision of how that relationship might develop?
Thank you. The issue, as you said, I mean, the institutions are created as the continental architecture to help development. But it was important we sign this so that we frame it properly, and also the ministers of trade understand the areas we would like to work together, put most of our focus on. And what he has done is put us in a situation where we also get the full endorsement of our board for the broad spectrum of interventions we are making. I give you an example. As I mentioned earlier, we have harmonized 155 standards on the continent, and we are continuing to harmonize. But it's one thing to harmonize standards. What of the quality infrastructure for testing? So we've set up a subsidiary called Africa Quality Assurance Centers. So we are building the quality infrastructure to facilitate the testing. You mentioned about the efficient transit systems. If you want, 16 countries in Africa are landlocked today. If you want to carry goods from Lagos to Abidjan, you have to cross how many borders? As you cross the borders, you post a transit bond. So under the arrangement we put in place, we now have the Africa Collaborative Transit Guarantee Scheme, so that we can have one transit bond, you don't have to stop. That is being piloted now at the Comesa region. So these, of course, require resources from us. These require that our shareholders continue to put up money to support us. So this agreement has helped us. And this agreement has also made it possible, plus other things we are doing, for the general capital increase we're currently implementing at $6.5 billion, because all the countries know, as he said, that without finance, this agreement will just be on paper. Nothing will come out of it.
Okay, thank you. And it's obviously vital that the views of the private sector are taken into consideration as the AfCFTA and Afreximbank support for that and the memorandum of understanding continues going forward. Can you both just say individually a little bit about how you're going to ensure that the views of the private sector and the necessities of the private sector are infused into everything you're doing? And what can you do to secure ongoing private sector support for the plans that you've got? Wamkele, do you want to?
We have a continuous and strong engagement with the private sector. There is the Africa Business Council, which is one of our partners. There's the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce. There's the Manufacturers Association of Africa. All of these private sector formations are really the critical pillars for implementation of the agreement. And I will reiterate the point that I keep making, and that is that this agreement is not for trade bureaucrats, people like me. It's for the private sector. Governments don't trade. Governments don't export. It is the private sector that trades. It's the private sector that takes advantage of new and open markets. And so we are engaging the private sector with a view to having the private sector being as a critical pillar for implementation so that they can see the advantages of new markets. Second, where there are challenges in implementation, we identify those challenges and we work together to resolve them. With Afreximbank later in the year, we will host the AfCFTA Business Forum in a few months' time. And we don't want it to be, diplomats talking to themselves. We want it to be a real engagement with the private sector. We want to have discussions about possible deals or transactions that can happen in the areas that I mentioned: investment in pharmaceuticals, investment in agro-processing, in the automobile sector. These are engagements with the private sector that are critical. We did a study, and our study produced astounding figures that if we work with the private sector in the implementation of this agreement, identifying these 4 value chains, we have an opportunity to create $11 billion worth of transactions annually and 750,000 jobs created as a result of partnering with the private sector in investing in these value chains. And these are practical things that we are looking to do, as I mentioned, in the area of pharmaceuticals, in agriculture. There certainly are opportunities. So we are determined that we work with the private sector to implement this agreement. Governments are important, but the private sector is more important because that is what creates jobs.
Thank you. Professor,
be clear, he said it all. The agreement is for the private sector. So everything you do is for the private sector. He forgot one important thing. As we're negotiating these rules of origin and all that, we managed to be getting the private sector to come to speak to the trade ministers. We had the African Automotive Association. We have the textile group. So they came, and their interventions actually led to changes in the way the rules of origin have been crafted. So the private sector is involved not only in terms of the business they do, but also in the policy formulation. We also have the Pan-African Private Sector Trade and Investment Committee. Afreximbank funds it, but the purpose of that is to be the conduit to do the kind of things I said, support the input of the private sector in the policy making. But business-wise, most of the interventions we do, the lendings we do, go to the private sector. With regard to the trade finance, we had made it a point that we want to make sure that every African country must have a bank that can make payments, that can open letters of credit. So we wanted to give 500 banks in Africa. We onboard them into our system, and so we can communicate to all across Africa, and also to make sure that we give them lines of credit for opening letters of credit. That we are at about just short of 500 banks. So everything we're doing is to make sure the private sector is in a position to play its own role with regard to supporting intra-African trade and the AfCFTA implementation.
Thank you. Before I open the floor for questions, can I just ask you each individually to just unpack your thoughts on one particular area, which is that of technology, and how technology is going to play a very key role, not just in terms of the settlements and the financing payment structures that the Professor was talking about a moment or two ago, but could you just say a little bit about how you're infusing the importance of technology in pan and intra-African trade?
We started negotiating the protocol on digital trade. What is clear from the pandemic is obviously the fact that e-commerce and digital trade has come to the fore of the global economy and is one of the drivers of the global economy. The advantage for Africa is that we don't have some of the legacy challenges that exist in other parts of the world, so we are able to leapfrog. So this protocol on digital trade will include a payment system, data flows and management of data, the transferability of data between countries, market access for technology companies that want to invest, a regulatory framework for digital trade. All of these things are critical to today's the global economy. We have success stories, as you know, M-Pesa in East Africa, in Kenya, cutting-edge digital mobile banking technology that happened years ago in the absence of a regulatory framework. And so we are in consultations with Afreximbank, with the large technology companies who are also part of this group that is drafting this protocol on digital trade, because we want to have a protocol that will position the African continent to really be competitive in areas such as the management and processing of data. There's no reason why any African country cannot be as globally competitive in technology and data management as Northern Ireland, for example. We already have in Rwanda, in Nigeria, in Kenya, in South Africa, we already have success stories of technology and trade that is enabled by technology. And so we want, through this protocol, to harness that. We want to make sure that we create opportunities. One of the anecdotes that really resonates and exemplifies the point, there are today, as we speak, women farmers of cut flower in Kenya who use digital tools, their smartphones, to trade cut flower, to make an assessment of the global market. So you are in a village, but you are using technology to trade, to access the global markets. That's the potential for the African continent in digital trade and technology.
Thank you. Professor.
Thank you very much. And very soon you will hear an announcement. That announcement is a collaborative effort of Afreximbank, AfCFTA Secretariat, the AU and UNECA. We are going to launch what we call the Africa Trade Gateway. This is a project that has been doing for the past 5 years. It's an ecosystem of digital products that we believe will bring down the borders. It's technology we know that will bring down the borders. And it comprises the payment system, the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, which is at the heart of the gateway. It has the Africa Customer Due Diligence Repository Platform, what we call the MANSA platform, where we are pulling all the KYC information for Africans in one place. That already has slightly under 6,000 entries. And by the end of September, we expect it to have 10,000 entries. So it will become the largest KYC platform in the world. And in fact, that was what the Indians copied to do theirs. So we already have that. People already subscribing to that. We have what we call the trader intelligence. That is the trade information portal and trade regulations portal. And the trade information portal we have is not the normal trade information. This trade information portal is built to use artificial intelligence to predict supply chains. So if you go in there and you want to check where to buy a particular item in Africa, if you just put it, it will use algorithm from a data lake to tell you the most likely place you can sell them or buy them. The regulations portal, we have 55 countries. The cost of searching to know what is happening in countries is too much. So the trade regulations portal pulls all of that in one item. That has also been completed. And then we have the Africa Trade Exchange, which is a business to business and business to government e-commerce platform. We have done drawing from what we did during the COVID with the African Medical Supplies platform. So all these are putting them in one platform. So you can envision that for next year, if you are an entity that wants to go and do business in Africa, the first thing you want to do is you want to understand where to buy a good. You can go into that platform and go to Trade Information Portal. You will hopefully locate who to buy, sell to, or where to buy the goods from. You want to know about the regulations surrounding the trading of that good, including the rules of whatever the AfCFTA had done. That platform will give it to you. And it will be the unique platform that will have it, because all the negotiations that are done under the AfCFTA, as they're updated, they're only updated in that platform. You want to know about the customer you are going to deal with. You go to the Customer Due Diligence Repository platform. You want to make payment for whatever you want to do. You do the payment. You want to do financing. You have the financing from Afreximbank, and it's an open platform. Other banks are also encouraged to connect to it, so they can also offer their services. So you can go there and also search for funding. So that is what we think technology can do to help us boost trade under the AfCFTA.
Thank you very much. A couple of quick questions, and if the shorter the questions and the shorter the answers. Yes, there's a gentleman at the back there. I can't quite see, just hiding behind the pillar.
Thank you very much, Alim Abubakri from Texem and London Business School, and of course Sheffield Business School. So thank you for a very insightful discourse so far. My question to you is, what are you doing around cryptocurrency, and are you looking at digital currency for the whole Africa bloc? And the final one is, what about data security? Thank you.
Thank you. And there's a lady here in the... can you give a microphone to them? Yes. I've been told we've got no time, but I'm going to take very, very quick question, madam, if I could. Very pithy. No, the lady.
My name is Terhas. I come from Eritrea, and I come from a family business background. My family owned 2 factories. When they were working, they were very successful. But because of the situation, the political situation in the area, there is a shortage of Forex, so the government cannot provide Forex. I've been trying to look for Forex for the factories to start, all to buy raw materials.
Okay.
No.
Thank you.
So can your bank provide funding for such
Thank you.
things?
No, only take 2 questions, I'm afraid. We're running out of time. So, Professor, Forex and then cryptocurrency, quickly.
Yes, Eritrea, we are the main suppliers of Forex to Eritrea. working with the housing bank, making all the payments for Eritrea and all that. So when we finish here, please let's meet outside, and so let's see how to directly address what we say. On the cryptocurrencies, you know very well, it's a regulatory issue. It's up to the central banks. The central banks are the entities that govern the Pan-African payment and settlement system. We envisage that the Pan-African payment and settlement system will move with the market. What the central banks want done will be done. And regard to data security and all that, I'm pleased to announce that perhaps the Pan-African payment and settlement system just got ISO certified, ISO 27001 on data security. So it just got certified a few days ago. So if you use it, you can be sure that you are using, your data will be protected to the highest of standards.
Thank you very much. Could I draw this session now? I'm afraid I've got to draw this session to a close. Forgive me, sir. I think our two guests are here for the next couple of hours, so please, if you can find them, do so. But please put your hands together for His Excellency Wamkele Mene and Professor Benedict Oramah. Thank you both very much indeed.